Did everyone press okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We're recording. For anyone listening, thank you. This is the first quote unquote episode of MSWA's Tough Talks. The intent of these interviews are to talk to faculty and staff, both because we don't really get to know our faculty outside of teaching context. I feel like so much of our knowledge of your backgrounds is just we kind of hear you mention things, we go, okay, like she must have done some of this or did this in a past role. And also, I think to encourage like curiosity in the program, I think maybe we all can disagree. Much of the conversation around our material and assignments is so outcome focused in a way that I think takes the learning and the fun out of it in a way that, as someone whose like core value is curiosity, I find a little frustrating. So that's the
Yeah.
intent. I guess we can go ahead and introduce ourselves. For those listening, my name is Chris. I should say the 2023-2024 president now because my tenure is over in 5 days. I'm about to graduate, obviously, second year cohort, community mental health. Vale, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Vale. I'm also an MSW student. I will be the 2024-2025 vice president for MSWA. So that's something. And I'm in the full-time program graduating in 2025.
And we are here. We're talking to a third party. We're here
I
with
know.
Dr.
That's not
Eghaneyan.
existent.
You want to go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us about your background and your experiences.
Sure. Well, my name is Brittany Eghaneyan. I'm an assistant professor in the department. This year was my fourth year in the department, but also in teaching at a university. I graduated in May of 2020, which was like very early pandemic times. And then came here to Fullerton. I graduated from the University of Texas at Arlington with my PhD. It's also where I got my master's in social work. So I am born and raised in Texas, but please don't hold that against me. We are now Californians, and we like it here a lot. So I love Cal State Fullerton. And when I first started this program, my whole first year was on Zoom. We did Zoom school, and that was weird. And so this almost kind of feels like my third year here because my first year just, I don't know, felt like it didn't count as much. What else? What else am I supposed to say?
I
Oh, my
guess,
research. My
yeah, that's
research.
where I was going.
Okay. So I've done a lot of my work around integrated behavioral health services, but under the broader focus of being very interested in mental health disparities among minoritized communities, particularly among the Latinx population. And so I think when thinking about that broader umbrella, I think a lot about like access to mental health services. I'm also really passionate about contributing to the development of the workforce that can be able to respond to the linguistic and cultural needs of diverse populations. And so I think that's where a lot of like my more like teaching and training, I work on a lot of the training grants here in the department. So I think my professional goals around that more broader umbrella kind of align with some of this other work that I do. So I've done a bit of research in mental health services, a little bit in substance use, although that's not really my specialty, but yeah, that kind of sums it up.
In terms of like research on, it sounds like mental health disparities in integrated healthcare, I think that's what we all assume your research interests were just because you're the BHO person and how
Right.
policy class works. I don't know how this question will go, but one thing I'd like to ask, especially like people in faculty positions, like, is there like an origin story for how you did your like? Is there actually a through line, or did you stumble on it? Like, how did you end up doing this
Yeah,
specific research?
I think we all have an origin story for like how we came to the field, but then for those of us who are also scholars, like how we became particularly interested in the field that we research. For me, I actually entered my MSW program really passionate about working with women. I worked in a domestic violence shelter. I worked with sexual assault survivors. So I really thought I was actually going to focus my research around women and working with women survivors. And although I'm still very passionate about that area, when I started taking some of the classes in my MSW program, specifically the policy classes, and was introduced to health disparities and these concepts, through that, I got connected to a professor who is at my institution, who has been my longtime mentor and is still my mentor today. I will say this was really kind of her area. She introduced me to the whole concept of integrated behavioral health and integrated care in primary care settings, which is like my super passion area. And so I got involved in a project that she had. She had like some internal funding that she was doing, and she was looking to hire a student, and I wanted some research experience. So I was just, yes, sign me up. And so I worked on that project with her. I worked very closely with the community clinic partner we had. I ended up writing my thesis on that project that we were implementing. It was an integrated behavioral health model in that clinic. And yeah, that was my intro to the topic and to the field. And I became really passionate about it. And even once I graduated, I ended up working on a lot of funded projects that were on integrated health services. So I primarily worked in research on some of those projects. And then when I pursued my PhD, I just continued my research in that area.
Yeah, it almost sounds like at first inherited, and then it kind of just lined up and you kind of vibed with it, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's for some folks, like when we go to PhD programs, you identify a mentor that you're going to work under and who's going to be your chair ultimately. And a lot of times our research interests align with theirs. Not all the time, but that can be the case. And for me, it was definitely the case, and then became something that I think I adopted. But I also, you kind of infuse your own priorities, your own passions, your own interests into maybe the topics or the fields that you're introduced to through mentors. And so for me, a lot of that was bringing in like qualitative work, bringing in, we call them patients in the clinic, but patient, client, lived experiences into health research, because I think that's really lacking in health research. And so part of my dissertation was to do qualitative interviews on a project that we were only collecting quantitative data on. So I ended up doing my dissertation on with a mixed methods research design, because I thought that was very important. So.
Do you view yourself as a qual person?
Oh, I can't answer that question. That's
You don't want to take a
too
side?
personal. No, I can't take sides. I love quant work because I like numbers and I like stats, and I think it's easy to do, and it makes sense. And you can take some of this data and these findings, and you can make some generalizations about it, which can be helpful in terms of guiding future research directions and creating policy and all of that those lovely things. But I think the quant doesn't matter without the qual. And so I really do appreciate and value qualitative research as well. And that is why I cannot take sides.
Yeah, I feel like having done qualitative interviews, like I think when you first hear about it, you're like, oh yeah, interviews, whatever. And then when you do them, like you kind of feel like the richness of the data and like how much is lacking in the numbers. On the note of like falling into a research interest, I guess I kind of relate in that I feel like I'm like the justice involved guy, but like I didn't choose justice involved as like my interest. Like I fell into it and just like stayed there for a while. So I was wondering for you, like it seems like you pivoted or changed interest, and like how you navigate this feeling of like not necessarily like choosing like this is my thing and like falling into it, like allowing that, because I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm supposed to just choose things, and if I don't, then it's like not real, if that makes sense.
I think so. I mean, what's weird about being a scholar, an academic, and having like an academic position is that you constantly have to choose what you're going to do. I mean, you can have broad research interests, or you can have a very specific focus, but you have to make the choice to continue to engage in that work constantly, or you can pivot and choose something else. Or you can get involved in random little side projects that aren't necessarily your expertise, but maybe the methodology aligns with something that you are either an expert in or you're just very interested in, and then you continue to, I don't know, build your experience and almost extend your research interests. I think I've gotten involved in a couple of things in my time here that were not something I necessarily had any experience in through like my PhD program or, early research experience, and doing some more like community-based work, doing more qualitative work. So I think even if your initial research topic or field or whatever it is not necessarily something that you chose per se, like the path that you end up taking ultimately is a choice. Like it continues to be a choice, and you're evolving as an academic and as a scholar. And sometimes people completely pivot, honestly, or take up whole new research interest, kind of like how people pivot in social work all the time. You do something for a bit and then completely change what you're doing after 10 plus years in the field because you just want to change. And what I appreciate about academia is that, we have the opportunity to do that too.
Yeah, I love that. I feel better about it now. Like this, it reminds me of discussions of like relationships, like it's continuously a choice, not just like a binary yes or no at the beginning.
Right.
I'm also mindful that I've asked a lot of questions. So, Vale, does any come to mind for you?
I guess I was just wondering, one, how you landed on social work in general as a field, and then also how you decided to pursue a PhD, because that's kind of like where I'm at of figuring out taking baby steps into academia. Maybe like give us a little bit of a background on what it looks like to enter into that side of social work.
Sure.
Any advice?
Absolutely. So my introduction to social work was not until either my final year or maybe even my final semester in undergrad. The program I went to, like, there was no social work program at our university, undergrad or graduate level. And I had this professor. Sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. I was a psych undergrad. I double majored in psych and cognitive science. And I thought I was going to get my master's. And what I was on track to do is get my master's in applied cognition and neuroscience. But as a double major psych, I took a lot of electives in psych, and I took this one elective called family violence. And the professor was a part-time faculty member, and I think she had her PhD in some type of psychology, but she had her master's in social work, and she considered herself a social worker in practice for quite some time. And that's how I was introduced to the field, was through her. And I remember writing her emails asking, like, I think I'm really interested in this field, but should I do this or should I do psychology? Can you provide me with some more context and an introduction to what being a social worker even looks like? And she was a kind, wonderful person and responded to my email and gave me some guidance. And then I started, what we start digging and researching into programs. And I went to an orientation session, or not an info session for a graduate program that was like the city next to mine. And they were like, this is what social work is. These are our values. This is what you can do with this degree. And I remember that was very much my aha moment. Like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. Like, this is the field I want to be in. Because I had already pivoted fields once. I was originally supposed to be an engineer. I was an engineering major undergrad. I know, it is funny. And then I was like, you know what? I need to feel like I'm working with people. I need to feel like a more direct contribution to like improving people's lives and making the world a better place. Not that engineers don't do that, of course, but I wanted to work with people. And so less little like machines and equations and stuff, and just more directly with people. So that's why I pursued psych. And then when I found out that social work was working with people, but from this social justice perspective, I was like, yes, okay, that's where I'm supposed to be. So that's why I ended up pursuing a master's in social work. But I had always had a interest in research. I did like some research as an undergrad. I worked in a speech language pathology lab. Actually, we just studied like children's speech pathology. It was very interesting, but I mainly just did that for the experience, the research experience. I wasn't necessarily interested in speech. So then when I was in graduate school, that's when I started, pursuing those additional opportunities in research, which my program was not structured the way our program is here, where it's like everyone's going to do research in their capstone project. It was optional to kind of pursue those opportunities. And so once I had reached out to that professor and learned about some of her work, and she offered me the opportunity to work as a graduate research assistant on her project. And then I ultimately ended up doing a thesis, which was also optional in the program. That was something you could do in lieu of, what was ours called? Like an integrative seminar, which was like kind of your big final project in that program.
Mm-hmm.
So in lieu of that, I went ahead and did a thesis, and I just liked it. I just like the whole research process. I like having questions, investigating the questions, and being able to share those results, not just with like the community and with the field, but applying it directly to practice, sharing it with, like I worked in the clinic. I did my thesis on the clinic and its implementation of this model. And then I got to share those results like with clinic leadership and talk about ways that maybe the model could be improved. I mean, it's like a whole nother way to kind of directly impact the world or communities or organizations just through like a different angle, And even though I really wanted to work with people, it was funny, once I started doing my classes in the graduate program, we had the option actually to be like what we call direct practice or macro focused. And I was like, oh, I don't think I want to do direct practice. I think the macro work will be more for me. And then that kind of shifted into, okay, yes, macro work, but macro in the form of research. So that's why I ultimately decided to pursue a PhD, because I just knew I love research. I want to do more research. And of course, you can do research without a PhD, but going to a PhD program, at least in social work, probably most fields, is really about being trained to be a researcher and being able to develop your own research agenda, and then ultimately getting either an academic position or some sort of other research position where you get to pursue that.
Awesome.
You have a question, Bill?
I was just going to say, do you think it's possible to do both research and practice? Because I know with social work, it's such a diverse field and like what you can do. And with so many opportunities and things like that, I'm just wondering, like, is that a possibility, or do you think it's more in line to choose a side?
I think it depends on the jobs that you take and just kind of all the choices that you make, right? So in a full-time tenure line position, I don't really think you'll have time to practice as much because of the demands of engaging in teaching and research at the institution. Take up so much of your time. I mean, but at the same time, I've definitely heard of folks like maintaining their private practice while also, being a faculty member and engaging in all the things that being a faculty member requires. I had some of those professors actually in my graduate program, or they ran, like a center on campus that provided like direct mental health services. So they did that, and maybe they probably didn't see clients themselves, but they provided supervision to, students and practitioners who were providing services, but then they were also teaching in our graduate program and also conducting their own research. I mean, I think there are ways to make it work. If you want to make it happen, right? I think it's about your priorities and again, like your choices. I am at a place in my life where I'm trying to build a little bit more balance. And so that I think looks like not recognizing that you can't do everything all the time and not feeling that pressure that you have to be doing everything all the time. So yes, I think it's possible, but I'm probably like a bad person to ask because I'm not a practitioner. Like I was never a clinical person. I didn't get my licensure. We definitely have faculty who, have their license and maintain their license. But I also think like if you don't work directly with clients and you're doing research or academia, like you still have the opportunity to use that clinical experience and clinical expertise to like it's still in your work. It's in for especially if you're doing like research on intervention type work or research that's directly applied to like clinical practice. I mean, all that those clinical skills and clinical experience like that definitely comes into play. That definitely matters. So
Yeah, you're speaking right to the two people that like to do the most. I was
I
like,
know.
wow, that's a little on the nose there. But yeah, I think it's just so interesting to see how like different paths you can take in this field. And I feel like so green in it that I'm like, there's so many opportunities, but I'm like, where do I go with that kind of thing? So it's definitely helpful to hear lived experience about it. Um, how did Can you explain a little bit about what research looks like as a faculty member? I like don't even know really much about it, so this might be kind of like a ignorance question, but I just don't even know what the requirements are. Like what is I know it can also vary by university as well, but just kind of if you have any background info or anything on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can definitely say that it varies so much
Mhm.
depending on each individual, but also depending on where you are. Um, what's really wild about like academia or being an academic and a scholar is that there is no how-to, there is no guidebook, and there is no like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. Like you have to kind of figure all of that out for yourself, which is kind of terrifying, but also amazing, you know, in to really be able to have that autonomy and freedom to kind of mold your research agenda and pursue the opportunities that you want to pursue. I will say that like the thing that most academics, you know, on the tenure track are guided by are going to be whatever the tenure requirements are of their department or their institution. And, you know, those are more of like this is where you need to be by the time you're applying for tenure, or we say going up for tenure. This is all the things that you have to have accomplished by the time you apply for tenure. But like the path to get there is completely like up to you and molded by you. And so, you know, what does research look like? I don't know. It can look like applying for grants and applying for funding to start, you know, managing and leading your own project and then getting those grants and hiring maybe research assistants and launching your IRB and collecting data, analyzing the data, publishing it. It can look like that. It can look like collaborating with people that you've never met in person, but you're connected through via email, through other academics, and then maybe meeting on Zoom a few times and working together on a paper that maybe they already have data for, or that maybe you're doing like I've done a couple of different reviews, like scoping reviews of the literature with folks that I've never met in person, but we collaborate virtually. And there's a lot of what I think is great is there's so many applications and obviously like beyond Zoom, right? Like all these ways that you can collaborate with people to like create products and research. So I've done a couple of those kind of projects. It can look like yeah, like building collaborations with people at your actual institution and engaging in some new projects in that way. Doing secondary analysis, so finding data that already exists and just analyzing it and writing about it. It varies so much, which is so amazing and so awesome because you can, I mean, at least in my experience, I think you can have a general idea of like, yes, this is my broad agenda and these are some of the things that I hope to do. But also, I mean, as you're going, like sometimes opportunities come up, you know, funding opportunities come up, or someone reaches out to you and they're interested in collaborating with you on a project, and then you pursue that. I mean, there's like to an extent also you can't predict everything. So you prioritize again the things that are important to you and matter to you and things that interest you and that you feel like are going to help you kind of continue along that path of conducting the research that you want to conduct.
Yeah, it sounds very individualized, kind
Oh,
of based on like you as an individual and what you want to accomplish professionally, which is nice because in my head, I was just kind of like, I think you just have to do 3 papers a year and then call it like at that. So that was my interpretation of it, but that really makes a lot of sense that you can kind of mold it to be what you want your research and career to look like in that sense.
yeah.
Chris, were
Yeah,
you gonna ask? Okay.
I was gonna jump in. It's funny we're talking about like individualized stuff, and like Vale and I are part of a project that I just like pulled out of thin air. Like Vale is my research
Yeah.
assistant on a study that I launched for Dr. Lozano. I guess on that note, in this conversation, like talking to Vale and myself, like are two people who kind of already have that interest in research and don't need to be sold as much. But I'm wondering, like for you, like how do you, if someone comes to you, like I don't know if I should explore research or think about it, like how do you help them navigate that decision? I think back to this might be a reflection of clinical psych, but I had a mentor, and one thing she always does is if someone asks her to help apply to a PhD, she will talk them out of it first, and if they still want to do it, then she knows like, all right, like maybe this is for you. And I kind of have the similar ethos of like, again, this might be a clinical psych thing. Like I'll talk people out of it, and if they're still down, then I'm happy to help. It's like for you, like how what factors would you recommend people think about as they like weigh a decision to explore research or not?
I think you really have to, like, I think it has a lot to do with your end goal. Like, what is your end goal professionally? And if it's not directly related to research, I don't think it makes sense to get a PhD. And you don't have to just go into academia, right? Like you don't have to go work at a university and do research or go to like a teaching institution like Fullerton and teach and maybe do a little bit of research. There are lots of other places you can just do research. I think you have to be interested in like the day-to-day of the research process and what that looks like, and know that it's going to be very different depending on these like different waves. And it also is very like self-directed. I mean, when I was a research like coordinator or assistant and I worked at a medical school, like doing research work, yes, every day someone told me what I was supposed to be doing. I mean, there was like, you're working on this project, we're recruiting people, you're collecting the data. Like my whole, weeks and life was very like structured and like, this is what you have to be doing. And so I was engaging in research, but not in this way where like I was choosing what I wanted to do. So if you want to get a PhD in research and you want to have that autonomy, I also think you have to have like the perseverance and determination to pursue that, because no one's going to do that for you. No one's going to tell you what to do every day or what funding mechanisms to pursue or what kind of projects you should be working on. That's all you. And so I think if you like a lot of, if you're there's almost like a certain level of creativity too that comes with it, like thinking about what is something really interesting that I could get involved in? What is a novel idea or something unique or something that contributes to the literature? Like if you're a curious person, if you want to contribute to growing knowledge in something, and you don't have to, I mean, I think to an extent you have to enjoy the writing process. There's a lot of writing, obviously, in research, but you don't have to necessarily enjoy stats, as we've just established. Like there's whole other methodologies that involve no statistics at all, which I think is really beautiful about the research process. So you can get engaged in other ways. But you have to be at least committed to like the scientific process of, creating knowledge and gathering data and, distributing knowledge. And you have to be willing to like, I mean, really, if you want a career in research, like you're going to have to be down to publish and submit to journals and present at conferences. And if you're into that, then you're into research, like you're in the right place. But if that all, like if I just described all those things and that sounds terrible to you, then I don't necessarily think that's the field for you, because there's other things you can do to get doctor in front of your name if that's what you're interested in. But research is not also like not necessarily where the money is, so I think there's a lot of other things you could be doing. I think you have to have a real interest and passion for like doing research specifically.
I have so much, I think, in response to that. I guess I'll start with like the passion thing. Like for you, like were there moments where like I felt like things were resonating? I'm like, oh, like how did you know you were on the right path? Like I think about the times that kept me in research or kept me out, and it's kind of like this contrast of peak experiences versus the opposite. And like for you, were there things in your path where you're like, okay, like I'm gonna keep going because like I really enjoyed this, or like that was more fun than I expected? Like my example for me is that I did a conference my last quarter of undergrad, and it's like the highlight of my undergrad career. And I was like, everyone was stressed, and like I'm glad it's over. And I was like, that was so fun. So like I think about like peak experiences and how those inform our decisions. And I'm wondering if you can remember any of your own.
Peak experiences, probably publishing my first paper. That was before getting into graduate school or even pursuing my PhD. I published my thesis that I wrote in my master's. And then I had my amazing mentor who really encouraged me to try to submit it for publication, which is hard to do when you're working a brand new job full time and you're so tired and you're saving up to buy a house and like you're all the things, you're adulting. And you already have a full-time gig, and then to engage in research on top of that, I was like, do I want to do this? And she was like, yes, you do, because you want to do research. So you do want to do this, and you should, make the time in the evenings or on the weekends to try to work on this paper. But seeing that come together and then get published in a journal was really rewarding for me. But I would say that was the first. I mean, there have been so many peak experiences. I've had a couple of attending conferences, but not even presenting at them, like just being in sessions and being super inspired by the work that people are doing. But I mean, throughout my career, and I would honestly say I'm pretty early in my career as a researcher, but just in the time that I've been doing this work, like collaborating with people, like other, brilliant people that I would think that are much, much smarter than me, but getting to sit with them and get ideas and like truly like create something like from nothing, just from collaborating with folks and coming together and be like, let's pursue this, and then seeing it through. I mean, and so that's like the long game. Sometimes that can take years, like from when you have the idea to when you're collecting the data and then publishing the data. And like, I mean, that can take a very long time, but even engaging in that process, like I love all of it. I love collaborating with people. I love like coming up with those ideas, collecting the data, going to the team meetings, then analyzing the data, writing about it. I'm into all of it. I mean, it's all when I'm doing that work, it's all very validating. There's never a time where I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this. For me, it's the challenge of maintaining that with all of the other responsibilities that come with being in this position. And particularly like at the institution I work at, because we are a teaching institution. I mean, and there are other places that you can go where your priority is going to be more research focused, and that is the expectation for you. And you're not going to teach as much, but there's also going to be a lot higher expectations in terms of like your productivity and research. So, it is, in some ways, I'm really grateful that I don't have as much pressure on me to do like all the research or all the work. But my challenge is like prioritizing it, because it is like one of the things I'm very, very passionate about. I just struggle to do it because I have a lot going on.
Yeah, I feel like I see you on lots of email threads of like, she's also in this thing.
Yes.
One thing that came up to me, I guess, as you were talking, it reminded me of doubts I had in undergrad. Like I remember talking to my PI. We had like during a team meeting, like she gave like a panel. Sounds wrong because she's our PI, but like she answered questions about grad school. And she described like, when I get new data, it feels like Christmas morning. And I was like, oh, should I not do research then? Because I don't know if Christmas morning is like a really strong analogy. So as you were talking, like I can like hear the passion and liking the day-to-day. And in research, the day-to-day is not always easy to like. So I wanted to ask, like, this is a really selfish question of like, do you have like the the cynicism that can come with being in academia of like, is this actually, like, for example, I gave a talk recently to a group of physicians who are researchers. And one question I posed to them was like, do social justice aims actually benefit communities, or they just benefit the careers of people who claim them in their research? So I have a very cynical streak in me because of some past experiences in research. So I'm wondering, like, if you ever feel the disconnect of like, is this actually helpful? Does this actually mean anything? And how like you navigate those times.
I think we all have those questions at some point in our career, or multiple, at multiple points. Like, is anything I'm doing really, does it really matter? But I think almost like what we tell social work students, quite frankly, like who are going into the field, like, wow, you're entering a field where there are so many problems and there's all kinds of issues, like huge, large scale issues that obviously like your individual work doesn't even feel like you're contributing to addressing the issue. And then we tell students like, oh, but if you impacted even just like one person, like you changed one person's life and they were like, wow, what you did really made an impact on me. Like, wouldn't that be enough to continue on? I kind of think about that in my work as an academic. I mean, if we're talking specifically about research, I don't necessarily do a lot of like intervention work. I did in my PhD program, and like just through like my mentor getting these grants, and then we did these studies and these clinics that allowed us to hire social workers and deliver these interventions, and then we would collect the qualitative data, and they would say like, this program changed my life. This gave me my life back. I mean, none of that would have been possible had my mentor not applied for that funding and conducted this very specific research project that, yes, like, in some way, sure. I mean, it's all furthering our career, right? She needed that external funding, helped her get tenure. And, we wrote a lot of papers about the funding, but we were also like doing direct clinical services through that project. And we were testing specific elements of the intervention, but I think that directly contributed to improving like a group of people's lives who were in our study. And I think, there's all these like small ripple effects that can be happening through the work. And sometimes it's really hard to not see it directly. And maybe we don't ever get to see it because it's maybe someone else read your paper and you'll never know that they read your paper, but reading your paper inspired them to pursue this particular agenda. And then they went on to do XYZ or do XYZ in the community or use that research to then get funding to improve services for something. And then, then they use that in a congressional briefing right? It's like all these things that can happen along the way. So I hear you about the cynical aspect that can come. And I think we all have those moments. But I also think that social work isn't the field, for cynicism, because otherwise none of us would be here. Because it's real easy to get cynical real quick. And I think you have to kind of maintain this optimism to survive in this field, whether you're a practitioner or a researcher or an educator or any of it. I think we all have to kind of hold on to the hope and optimism that what we're doing makes a difference, or we're going to get burned out real quick.
Yeah, I'm hearing the word that comes to mind is like trust, of like just trusting your work and trusting that things work out. And remind that we had this exact conversation in your policy class. I remember because I brought up the whole starfish thing.
Yeah,
Um,
I love the starfish thing.
yeah, I know I went off on my selfish questions. Do you have things you want to ask?
That's okay. You can be selfish. But
Thank you.
I was just wondering, as like a professor and having interacted with MSW students in particular, like is there any aspects of them as learners, as people that have like stood out to you, or anything that you think maybe future MSW students should kind of look for or work on, or any type of advice like that for MSW students that they could apply now in their program and then also after the fact in their careers?
Yeah. There's so many things. It's hard to kind of focus on some of the key things. I mean, so I would also like to start by saying that I really enjoy teaching and working with students. And that part of my job has also impacted, like, not the way I view my research, but I would say maybe the priority I put on my research. I think that has shifted. It's now less about that and more about my work with students for me personally. And I'm not saying that's like every professor's experience or viewpoint, but for me, I'm like, maybe the research isn't as much a priority as it is working with students. And in terms of working with MSW students, like things that I think are really beneficial. I mean, sure, in your time in the program, but I think beyond that is having this, almost like Chris was saying, like this genuine curiosity to the field, wanting to grow in your profession. I mean, in general, and showing up because you're interested in learning and being a good social worker, or really impacting the community, and not just because you have to, and seeing, and I know that being in graduate school and being in a program is very, like, inherently we have you focus on those outcomes like grades and assignments. And it's just really not about that. It's really about like the learning that's taking place. And, I think some of us, we're trying to think about the ways that we approach teaching or assignments or whatever it is to make more of a direct connection to like the learning or the growth or whatever it is you're going to be doing in the field. But I also think students have to have that mentality too when they're coming in. Like, we're not just making you do something so that we can assign you a grade and check a box. Maybe take every, assignment or learning experience, learning activity, even if it's just like an in-class activity or discussion, as an opportunity to learn something new or learn something that is in some way going to be applicable to the work you do later. Even if it's like working with difficult people who are in your class or in your group, like, there are going to be so many difficult people that you have to work with in the future, and so maybe you're just stretching that muscle a little bit through this particular activity, so I think coming in with the attitude that, yes, this program is intense and rigorous, and yes, we're asking a lot of you, but it is also like a very short window of time. And I think there's something really amazing and unique about graduate school, and that it is your opportunity to investigate issues or topics or populations like that you're really interested in, and spend the time to really like grow your knowledge and learn new things, because it gets a lot harder to do that when you're out in the field and working a full-time job and maybe starting your own family, or I mean, there's all these other things. You're also pursuing probably passions and hobbies. I don't know, I don't have them, but that's a thing for some people, and so it's exhausting, it's draining, but it's also a really, I think, amazing opportunity. And so what I would recommend for students is that to just maybe try to keep that perspective during these very intense 2 to 3 years, because it's going to be over so fast.
Yeah, someone
Yeah,
about to
I
graduate,
hear
it
that.
it's pretty
Yeah.
fast. I also say that, on the note of like assignments being applicable to the real world, and like I always felt like in your class assignments were thoughtful, and we had our team leaders meeting at lobby days where they reviewed like California legislature's process, and I was like, I learned this,
Oh,
I
good.
presented this, and I was like, oh, I learned something in class. So sometimes I think it takes those moments to like see the connection of like, oh, like that thing in class, I see why we do it now. Um, I'm mindful that we're approaching the full hour, so I'm going to try to ask quicker questions, and if the answers are long, like whatever.
Okay.
On the note of curiosity, I guess a more fun question is like, for you, either in your research or outside as like just a person, like where has your curiosity been recently? Like what things are you looking at learning or trying to learn right now?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I am becoming very interested, and this is really because of my work primarily in a lot of these like training programs and training grants that we have in the department. So a lot of my teaching and work has become focused on like, how do we better prepare social workers to fill in the blank, work in integrated healthcare models, serve diverse populations, whatever it is. I have become a little like more interested and curious through that work on like how we can start utilizing technology to help train social workers, but also like not just in the program, like help prepare them for using technology when they go out and work in the field. Because I think that field is really evolving and it looks different every year. And I want to think about like how should we be tackling some of those things like in our curriculum or in MSW programs in general, and how can we leverage technology to maybe fill in some of the gaps that we have, or to basically make social work practice more effective, easier, efficient, whatever it is. So I've been thinking a lot about that. I've been attending a couple trainings on really interesting things, truly. Like I went to a training recently on using virtual reality in all kinds of ways. I mean, the presenter talks about all these different kinds of use cases for using VR. And I'll just say like, that's never something that would have crossed my mind when I was a master's student, which was a long time ago, but not that long ago in like the grand scheme of things. So, yeah, I've been thinking a lot more about that. My husband works in tech. So I also have like that in my ear, someone who's really like in tune with the field, like uses ChatGPT every day in his work, but like in a not in a sketchy way. Like we always,
Of course.
in academia, we're always like, oh no, they're using it for papers. And I just think, okay, but they're only students for a short period of time. Like, let's think about how we're using some of these, AI interfaces or platforms, like how they're actually being used in the real world. And like, what are some of the ethical dilemmas around that? What are some of the ways that it actually can be really great? It's something I've been thinking about.
That's your engineering side coming out a little bit, it seems like.
Just a little bit, but not too much.
You have a question, Bill?
I was like, just for like a more personalized question is, how do you manage between being a social worker and a researcher and a professor and everything else, alongside having a personal life and living normal adult day to day and things like that? Because I feel like that's what I'm trying to learn myself.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm managing it very well.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
which I think a lot of people will say, especially those of us who have like younger kids. I think I will, at least from my perspective, at least mothers, I think a lot of us feel like we're probably not doing that great managing it. Like it literally feels like day by day, taking it day by day and hoping that it all works out. And then another year goes by and you're like, all right, I think I did okay. I think that turned out fine. Could be better, but fine. I will say that a lot of managing that has been less focused on like, oh, I can do it all, and just more about giving myself grace and real like almost like lowering my expectations, but with the understanding that the expectations were always too high, and that I think they are just universally high, especially in academia. But that's a whole other, I think that's like a whole other talk, and I could talk so long about that and like falling into these expectations and managing them. But I have created new expectations for myself. And so that's what I've been doing and I've been working on, which I think contributes to my overall well-being, and just like stress and anxiety. I remember when I first had my kid, my first one, I had only been out of the program, my MSW program, for a couple of years, maybe a year. So I hadn't been working that long. And then my mentor was really encouraging me to apply for a PhD program. And I applied when he was only a year old. I was like, what am I doing? This seems insane. And she was like, yeah, so now that you're a parent and you're trying to pursue research and then you have all these goals, just get ready to always feel like you're mediocre at everything. Like you're a mediocre parent, you're mediocre at your work. And she said that in for me, like to hear that as someone that I really looked up to, I'm like, I don't know what she's talking about because she is killing it, like absolutely killing it. Like she's so good at her job. And then, you know, I became close with her over the years and I felt like she was an amazing parent. So it never looks like that from the outside, but it feels like that all the time. And so it's almost just like letting that go, like lowering your expectations and being like, yeah, I'm just mediocre at everything. But people don't perceive you that way. People will think like, wow, you are where you are because actually you're really exceptional and awesome at what you do. And you're like, yeah, I guess that's right. It doesn't feel that way, but I guess that must be right. Um, I don't know. That didn't really, I don't think that really answered the question because I don't know that I really have it. That's just been my approach.
Did.
I think it did.
Yeah, it reminds me of that saying, like, a jack of all trades, but a master of none, which is something that always plays in my head because I have always strived to be a jack of all trades. And I think I need to accept the master of none, but then also to a lot of people, I seem like a master, and yet I do not feel like a master. So maybe we'll have to adjust it more to be like, yeah, you could be a jack of all trades and a master at some.
I think a lot of people who kind of excel to a certain point in their career, or maybe it's a lot of people who end up doing academia because you know, there's like a minimum requirement that you're meeting there. Like you did undergrad for social work, you also had to do a master's, and then you also pursued a PhD. Like clearly, like you're already a person who does the most. And you probably have like a lot of just high expectations of yourself. And so those feelings of like, it's never enough, those are really hard to quash. I feel like people in this field have that naturally. Like that's part of how you've got to where you are. So like some of the internal work comes with like, hey, like I got the job that I had worked like 10 plus years to get. Like this is it. This is the dream job. So maybe I should stop being so hard on myself and feeling so bad that I'm not doing enough or I haven't published enough because like I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right. So
I love this
I think
conversation.
you two are gonna need to work on that.
Yeah, I think it's a lifetime thing. One of the themes of me in our practicum class this year has been talking about like not being attached to staying at my ceiling and being comfortable like with where my floor is at and focusing on like my floor is here. If it's good enough, then like just allow myself to be there. Because not everyone's floor is at the same level. That sounds so arrogant. I guess for final questions, because Gavin's not here, I feel like he wants me to ask this question because I'll ask it randomly in like office hours or in classes. He's been asking like every professor like what are some books they might recommend. And I joked with him that he should read Cass because Cass is on my bookshelf. It's in your office because I saw it. Dr. Cap's office. So we're all big fans. But
That's
any
great.
recommendations for resources or readings for us soon to be graduates?
I also have been like we read as a department How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I have not finished it, but I would like, and I told I say that like
Because I know how yet.
yeah. But I do think it is one of those books that can be applied to like anyone who wants to do this work. That is part of our call as social workers, and like we worked in a department and like thinking about how we could apply some of those principles to like education, but so much of that book is about like how do you apply these principles to your everyday life. And I would challenge people who want to work in social work to read that book and think about what does this mean in terms of my practice, like what does this mean for my personal life and the way I interact with people day to day, but also in my clinical work or whatever it is that you're doing and your research and your, you know, in your academia, whatever it is. So I think that's a good one. I will also say that I do not have a lot of time to read for leisure, so I'm
Fair enough.
probably a bad person to ask this question. Please ask Dr. Cap.
He will.
I joined a book group that he led. I can't remember, like my second year maybe, and it was like the only way I was forced to read books that I actually wanted to read. So that Cast was one of them actually. So.
I really enjoyed Cass. Like I recommend it to like everybody.
It was good. You know, they made a movie now. I haven't seen the film.
I saw, yeah. I haven't seen it. I saw that they made it.
Yeah. Yes. So I can't think of any other ones. I'm like looking around if I have any on my shelf that are out right now. I also have like one of those never ending like to-do reading
Yeah.
lists, but it exists with books and then it also exists with research articles. So
Ooh, yeah.
it gets worse.
Okay. I have one more question. Final
Yes.
one for real. I guess, Vale about to be halfway done, me about to finish our MSW. What are like things you would have told yourself at this point in your career? Like words of advice, lessons learned that you maybe wish you learned earlier or not the hard way, like that you would tell students in our position?
I think it's kind of related to the whole idea, like take some of the pressure off. But even when it comes to, I'm thinking about y'all because you're about to start, you're about to go on the market, Vail will still go on the market, like to find your first real like social work jobs, right? Like the job is just a job and it's not like what you're committed to for the rest of your life. It's not what you don't have to like continue to pursue that specific field, or if it's not everything you want to be doing in social work practice or everything you want in a job, like that's okay. It's just a stepping stone. You could be there just a year or two and it could lead to something else like super great, or like the job that you really wanted. And I don't know, when I was younger, I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to like, oh, this all has to be XYZ and it all needs to line up and it needs to check these boxes. Um, and then like more time goes by and you realize like, oh, like there's so much time and you're so early in your careers, as most people are when they're leaving our program. Like you have so much time to build your career, to evolve. Like your first job is no indication at all of where like your career could go or where you could end up eventually. So my piece of advice would just be to kind of take the pressure off. And also for those who are interested in research, you don't have to know that now or decide it now. It's there. PhD programs will be there. You can always come back to academia. You can get out there and work for a little bit. And maybe you decide, I never want to go back. And maybe after a few years, it's gnawing at you. And maybe that's when you know, okay, maybe it's time to go back. Right now you guys are, I know Vail, not you yet, but you're about to leave this like really exhausting 2 years. And a lot of people, I think, leave this program a little burnt out, at least from school, not necessarily, hopefully not, but from school. So it's really hard to imagine going back like right away, like signing up for that again. That's like that's like asking someone who just had a baby, who's like literally not sleeping and still like in the throes of taking care of a newborn. And they're like, so you think you're gonna have another one? I mean, that's wild. Like no one does that. Some people do that. You shouldn't do that. I think it's the same thing for school. Like no one should be asking master's students who are like in their last 2 weeks of the semester, who are super exhausted and doing all their final projects, like, do you think you want to get a PhD? Like ask them again in like a year or two. I think it'll be completely different answers.
Yeah.
You might get a random email from me in a year or two then.
I'm around.
Sounds like you're
I
speaking
hope,
right to Chris.
yes, I hope you do. I actually would love it if more students followed up with me after they leave the program.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. This was fun. I appreciate it.
Let us stop the recording.